welcome to this episode of Let's Talk 716 Sports. My special guest is Eugene, and we will be talking some hockey.
Hello.
Let's get to talking Let's Talk Sports. What do you think of the Sabres draft picks, like when they drafted this year?
So I think the Sabres had a very smart draft. The first couple of picks they made, I think, were all players that really could be, top end stars next couple of years. Let me look up their picks here real quick so I get their names right. Let me do this. NHL. The main thing is their first pick was at 9th overall. I think they nailed that pick. What's his name here? Matthew Savoy. I think he's a player that is very high end offensive talent. He's a little bit undersized, but I think as we're seeing in the league that doesn't matter as much as it used to, or maybe it never mattered. He's a player that I could see him being a second line, first line center potentially if things go really well. And he's a player that you want to have in your prospect pool. I think in general they made a lot of very smart picks. And I think this is one of those things where they've done well the last couple of years. I look back to last season. Of course, they had Power in first overall, but also Isaac Rosen was a great pick. Another one, very talented, very smart player who makes your forward core better. And those are the sort of players you need to fill out a lineup and to really reach your potential. And those would be the players that they need to take those steps in the next 2-3 years for the Sabres to get over the top finally. So yeah, great draft. I think they made a lot of chances. I know the 28th overall pick, getting another small center prospect was not the favorite pick when there were some better defensemen available, but it was a pretty forward heavy draft at the top. So I'm not surprised that the Sabres decided to just take 3 chances on 3 different centers who fill a similar need. But it doesn't hurt to have too many centers, and let's say if all 3 hit, then you could trade one later on for a really good return. And if all 3 hit, then that's a great thing to have.
What did you think of when they went and picked the goalie?
So the interesting is I write prospect profiles for the Hockey Writers, and some of the people I've talked to about the goaltenders in this draft was that it was not expected to be a good goaltender draft. But just because it's not expected to be a good goaltender draft doesn't mean that's not going to have starters in the draft. Goalies are the hardest ones to project in the sport. The goaltender they took was, I think, the number 1 or number 2 available. I know they were the first ones to take a goalie this year, and he's a good goaltender. It's just hard to know if he's ever going to be able to develop into a starter just because goaltenders are borderline impossible to predict. I think it's a great pick, though. He's a player that's going to be able to spend time in Finland developing. And I think he's a player that could really pop in 3, 4, 5 years once he gets his legs under him, gets more time playing against men in Finland, and then makes the step to the AHL and play a couple seasons. It was a little early. I don't know if he would have been there in the 3rd round. I have people who told me that the best goaltender shouldn't be taken until round 3. But I understand why Buffalo took the pick with their 2nd round pick, because they only had 1 2nd round pick this year. And a team like Seattle Kraken took a goaltender with their 2nd round pick. So if I believe Leninen is his proper, I'm sure not pronouncing that right, but I believe it's Leninen. If he'd been available, they probably Kraken would have taken him with their pick. So I get why they took him a little early. And honestly, if he develops into even a backup goaltender, there's no such thing as being taken early in that case.
Do you think the Sabres will be like a good, fun team to watch, in the next 3 years?
100%. I really think they're going to be a fun team. even if they aren't in the playoffs the next year or two, I think they're a team that's going to be a blast to watch. I know as a Lightning fan, that's my primary beat that I write for. They are going to be a team that I look forward to watching, and I plan to going to their games because I think that they're young, they're exciting, they're gonna have a lot of talent. They're gonna make a lot of mistakes because they are very young. Um, but that's part of the fun of having a young team. I remember watching the Lightning for a long time early on when the team wasn't quite there yet, and then and then all of a sudden they were. I think that things can be a blast to watch them in the next couple of years.
Do you think the Sabres, like, do you think they'll be like a wild card team going into the playoffs? Um, like in the upcoming like 3 years, or
Over the next 3 years, I could see them making those steps. I believe, especially with their young defense, with Power and Darlene, those players, it's going to take a little while for them to make those developments. But once they get there, they're going to be a dominant unit, a part of that defensive unit. And I think a really good defense can fill in a lot of holes in your team. I think like we said, you drafted a lot of really smart draft picks in the forward core that if they start hitting, there could be a really high end offensive potential. And once they get that goaltender figured out, whether it's through the draft, through development, or through free agency or trade in the next few years, they could really pop. Now, the problem I always say though is since they're in the Atlantic Division, I don't know how. I think the Atlantic Division is the most difficult division to play in right now. I think the unfortunate part is there's maybe only I can confidently say they might be better than the Canadians due to the Canadians' injuries going into the season. I can't confidently say that they're better than the Senators anymore because the Senators added a lot of talent this year, and I don't know how much better they're going to look. I don't know with the Red Wings; they added a lot of talent this year. This Boston Bruins, they have a lot of question marks, but they're still a great team, have a great goaltending tandem. So there's a lot of question marks there that the Sabres, unfortunately, I can't confidently say this year, but in a year or two, they could be ready to take that step and just like I said, be a wild card team or be in the top three.
um, what teams in the Atlantic Division do you think the Sabres could potentially pass this year?
The Atlantic Division, I believe that they should be better than Montreal in if Montreal continues to have injury issues. Um, Outside of that, it's way rockier. Best way I can put it is, unfortunately for the Sabres, if they were in like let's say the Metro, I'd be able to say I believe that they're better than the Devils and the Flyers. I think they'd finish in front of them. Same thing with the Central. I think the Blackhawks are in catastrophic mode right now. They're looking to tear it all down and be the worst team in the league. So I think confident they'd be in front of them in the Coyotes. But in the Atlantic, you just don't have that same buffer room right now. But every year, there's teams that do better than expected and teams that do worse than expected. For example, for the Lightning, they're coming off 3 long playoff runs. I wouldn't be shocked if they start slow this year because they're so injured. A lot of players coming back off injuries, a lot of players having surgery. And like I said, if you start slow, you're going to have to make the points up somewhere. A team like the Sabres, they may start fast. They're young, they may pop. There's a lot of energy there, a lot of talent, and all of a sudden it might be December and they're still hanging around when no one expected that. Um, but like I said, if I was a betting man, I wouldn't be betting on the Sabres this year, being on above more than the Canadians and maybe the Red Wings if they have another rough season. But I wouldn't be shocked either if they manage to all of a sudden start putting it together this year.
Like if the Sabres were able to put it together and um get like to like 80 points before December, do you think they would have a chance?
Definitely. Like I say, if you're in the playoff hunt in December, you have a chance. It's going to come down to the goaltending. The tandems the Sabres have right now are not the most inspiring, but they could steal games. Anderson's a great goalie, but he's old, injury, can be dealing with injuries. Comrie isn't good enough goalie, a great backup. Subban's another one, great backup. I think between those 3 starter players, you can get 30 starts each that are solid. Um, but let's say if they're in the hunt come the trade deadline, or let's say December range, there's a chance they could go out and try and find a starter from another team. They have the cap space to make it work. They have the cap space to go out and bring in players this deadline, or they have the cap space to pick up a lot of picks in this 2023 draft. A lot of the scouts I've talked to and a lot of people I know at the hockey writers who do the scouting have spoken very highly of the 2023 draft. They're saying it's the best one since 2015 in terms of depth and players. And that's a draft that you want to have a lot of picks at. So I could see them going out there and maybe utilizing their cap space to get players they wouldn't be able to get normally because they can afford to.
Do you think, like, with JJ Paterka and Jack Quinn, do you think that they would be getting call-ups from the AHL?
They should be able to. They're both players who look like they're ready to start taking on NHL time. I wouldn't be shocked if out of training camp, either one makes the starting roster. Quinn in particular, I think he's going to be a player that really pops once he finds his footing. And I think he's one I would not be surprised if he makes it out of camp this year and is starting in maybe a third line role in a sheltered power play time. Either one I would think would be able to take time this year. I'd be shocked if he didn't get a start, I should say. If they didn't get at least, let's say, 25 starts each throughout the season. And Quinn in particular, I could see him doing most of his season in the NHL this year.
Do you think that, like, Pekka Lucan would get a few call-ups?
But that one I'm not as sure on. That's just my lack of not knowing the Sabres depth chart as well, as I do as the Lightning depth charts. He's a player when I've spoken to other Sabres fans and Sabres people, writers in the past, that they've said that he's going to be the answer. He's still only, I think, 23, 24 range. He's still very young. So it may be better for him to spend another year in the AHL and really figure it out before he is pushed into NHL time. The worst thing that a team can do is put a young goaltender into a bad position. And the Sabres may not be a good position just yet, especially as that developing D core. The example I always use is Victor Hedman wasn't Victor Hedman until 2014. Right now, Dahlin and Power aren't going to be the dominant players they will be in 5 years. They're going to make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, that puts your goaltender in a bad spot. A player like Anderson, he's seen it all. It won't bother him at all. But a player like, is it Pekka Lucan? Pekka Lucan? I want to make sure I'm saying that right. He's still young, and I think he'd be better off in the AHL for another year to marinate, unless if he really dominates. There's a chance that he's going to be ready to go by, let's say, the training camp again. But it's not one you want to rush because, like I said, I think you're better off finding a starter goaltender in him in a year or two than rush him into a spot and have him not be ready.
Did you have any questions?
Yeah, I believe it's just in general. How are you feeling about the season coming up?
I feel pretty good about the season. I mean, like what Ron said, he's ready for the season to start.
Yeah, which is good.
And I mean, I feel good about like Darwin and Cousins and like
That's right. Cousins, I forgot about him. He's another one. Great talent. I think in another year or two, he'll be a player that we're talking about in all-star voting pretty soon.
and I think like Tage Thompson would be another like all-star voting
Yeah.
or to be at the all-star games.
Yeah, it really is a team. Let's say you named a few names there that you forget about sometimes that they're on the Sabres. And then you remember like, oh yeah, they had a great season last year. Even Jeff Skinner had a rebound season last year. It may not be living up to his contract, but if you can still put together a 30-goal season, that's a lot of points. That's a lot of goals. And there's a lot to be excited about. Which I think is the most important thing for Sabres fans this year is it's going to be just a fun year. So it won't always be great. There's going to be defensive breakdowns. There's going to be learning curves with these young players, but it's going to be fun. I feel like especially the last few years, the Sabres fans, there were points where it was very low when I talked to my Sabre friends and Sabre fans out there, where they weren't feeling very good about the franchise. And I think you're past that now. Like I said, it won't be, there'll be frustrating nights, but the frustration will be watching young players get better instead of watching players just failing to produce. And it's a lot more fun having young players make a mistake rather than watching just bad competition on the ice. And it's going to be a very exciting year. I'm actually really excited to see the Sabres this year in Tampa.
Do you think that like Buffalo will make it competitive with Tampa Bay?
Competitive, they should, as long as their goaltending holds up. Um, like I said, it's going to be one of those things where Tampa is still just such an experienced team. As long as they are able to get on the ice with all their players, they should be able to win most of the games against the Sabres. But I feel like the Sabres every year give Tampa a hard time just in general. Um, I want to say the last time they played, Tampa won 5-0. I don't think it's gonna be like that again. As long as they have a competitive goaltender and the defense plays well enough, it should be closer than 5-0 for sure. Um, and they're a team that the Sabres can look towards Tampa and say, this is what we could be and should be in 3 to 5 years. We have the talent around us. We have the defensive core. We have the players. Like I said, Darling to Hedman's a very, very, very good player that Darling should be looking up to. Someone like Hedman, of course, as a top pick in the draft, as a defenseman who defined essentially an era of play. Darling could be that sort of player for Buffalo, and they're a team that, like I said, I would expect the Lightning to win the games, but I expect it's going to be a lot closer and a lot more fun. It's going to be very competitive.
If the Sabres were to make the playoffs, do you think they would get far, or do you think they'd be knocked out in the like first or second round?
The playoffs are impossible to predict. One injury can change a team entirely. The Sabres are a team that, as they're constructed now, I just think they're too young to make a really deep run. And I don't think the goaltending tandem or whatever you want to call it, tandem, triple, whatever it is right now, unless if one of those three players really steps out and breaks out this year, I don't believe that they'd be able to make it past the first round. As we saw, great teams fall right now because the NHL has a lot of really good teams. Uh, as a Tampa Lightning writer and person who follows that team closely, I can confidently say that Toronto was much better than a team that should have lost in the first round. That was an amazing team, an amazing series. It's a shame it happened in the first round and not in the second or third round. And Buffalo, I don't think are in that level yet, but they're getting there. So if they were to sneak into the playoffs this year, make a surprise run, it may not be past the first round, but if they made it there, it'd be an amazing story, it'd be an amazing experience for those young players.
What is the main team that you write for?
So my main team I write for is the Tampa Bay Lightning. I've been writing for them for the Hockey Writers since 2017. I'm the lead writer for them. I also do at-large writing for Hockey Writers. So I do hockey history. I write about the draft and free agency. I do news pieces, a little bit everything. But my main team is the Lightning. I've done some coverage for the Sabres in the past when we needed someone to pop in and help out with that. Uh, but mostly Lightning.
And where could my listeners or viewers like find your writing?
So I'm at thehockeywriters.com. We're a one-stop shop for all things hockey. We have writers to cover all the major teams as well as other things like I said, the draft, free agency, all that. We definitely have writers covering the Sabres. They produce a lot of great content. Your fans would love to check out their stuff. And so if you have any questions about draft, we have great draft resources from this 2022 draft. and we're going to start writing profiles in 2023, starting probably mid-March. So a lot of coverage coming up over the next year. Great stuff for listeners to check in on. So once again, that's thehockeywriters.com. Easy to find.
And what is your Twitter handle?
So on Twitter, mine's easy. It's just Eugene Helfrick, EUGENEHELFRICK. Just my first and last name. I managed to sit on that one early on, so it's easy.
Do you have any other questions?
Not really a question, but just I want to say to the Sabres fans is just have a lot of fun this year. I think you're gonna have a blast. I said you won't always be winning, but you're gonna be having a lot of fun watching this team. I'm excited to watch them, and I really think you're gonna enjoy this season. It's positive things on the horizon. I think in the next 2-3 years, this team's gonna pop.
Thank you for tuning in or listening to this episode of Let's Talk 716 Sports. Thank you to my special guest, Eugene. And
Anytime.
And let's go Buffalo.